Welcome to tonight's sleep story. This tale will be accompanied by the gentle sound of rain to help you drift off to sleep. Before you get too comfortable, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. I'd love to know where in the world you're watching from and what time it is there. Leave a comment below. It's fascinating to see how our community spans different time zones, all united in seeking a peaceful night's rest. Now, make yourself comfortable, adjust your volume, and let the rain and story guide you into peaceful dreams. Our story begins. Sarah Mitchell had always found antique shops fascinating, but Madame Beaumont's curiosities was different. Located in a narrow cobblestone alley in New Orleans' French Quarter, the shop seemed to exist in a perpetual twilight, even during the brightest summer days. The brass bell above the door chimed ominously as she stepped inside, the sound echoing through the cramped space filled with forgotten treasures and mysterious artifacts. The air inside was thick with the scent of old books, polished wood, and something else. Something sweet and cloying that reminded Sarah of funeral homes. As a curator for the city's historical museum, she had visited countless antique shops, but none had ever made her skin crawl quite like this one. "Can I help you, Sherry?" The voice came from behind a towering shelf of Victorian dolls, making Sarah jump. Madame Beaumont emerged from the shadows like a specter, her silver hair arranged in an elaborate updo that might have been fashionable a century ago. Her dark eyes seemed to hold secrets that Sarah wasn't sure she wanted to know. "I'm looking for pieces for our upcoming exhibition on Victorian childhood," Sarah explained, trying to keep her voice steady. "Particularly dolls and toys from the 1860s to 1890s. Madame Beaumont's thin lips curved into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Ah, then you must see her." She gestured for Sarah to follow, leading her deeper into the labyrinthine shop. In the very back, illuminated by a single shaft of dusty sunlight streaming through a high window, stood a glass case. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Inside was the most beautiful porcelain doll she had ever seen. The doll wore an elaborate cream-colored dress with real lace trim, her golden curls arranged perfectly under a miniature bonnet. Her face was painted with extraordinary detail. Rosy cheeks, delicate eyebrows, and long lashes framing eyes that seemed to shimmer with an impossible shade of violet. "She's exquisite," Sarah whispered, pressing her hands against the glass. "What's her history?" Madame Beaumont's voice took on a strange, sing-song quality. She belonged to a little girl named Violet Montgomery back in 1873. The doll was made in her image. Same golden hair, same unusual eyes. Violet was the only daughter of one of New Orleans' wealthiest families. "Was?" Sarah asked, unable to tear her eyes away from the doll's hypnotic gaze. "The child died shortly after her 8th birthday. Mysterious circumstances, you understand. They found her in her bedroom, perfectly arranged in her bed as if sleeping, but cold as marble. The doll was clutched in her arms." Madame Beaumont paused, studying Sarah's reaction. "They say Violet had been begging her parents to take the doll away in the weeks before her death. Said it whispered to her at night. Said it wanted to play games she didn't like." Sarah should have felt a chill at the story, should have backed away from the case. Instead, she found herself more drawn to the doll than ever. "How much?" "For the museum? I could part with her for $5,000. The price was steep, but not unreasonable for a piece of this quality and historical significance." "I'll take her," Sarah said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. She would figure out how to justify the expense to the museum board later. As Madame Beaumont carefully lifted the glass case, Sarah caught a whiff of that sweet, funeral home smell again. It seemed to be coming from the doll itself. The old woman wrapped the doll in silk paper with practiced care, but Sarah noticed her hands trembling slightly. "Take good care of her," Madame Beaumont said as she handed over the carefully wrapped package. "And Sherry? Perhaps keep her in her case at night. For safety's sake." Sarah laughed nervously. "Safety? Old dolls can be so fragile," Madame Beaumont replied, but her eyes said something else entirely. The drive back to the museum was uneventful, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her from the wrapped package on the passenger seat. Twice, she caught herself glancing over, half expecting to see those violet eyes staring back at her through the paper. The museum was closed on Mondays, which meant Sarah had the building to herself as she carried her precious cargo to the conservation lab. Her footsteps echoed through the empty halls, and the security lights cast strange shadows that seemed to dance at the corners of her vision. In the stark fluorescent light of the lab, Sarah carefully unwrapped the doll. She had handled countless antiques over her career, but her hands were unsteady as she removed the last layer of silk paper. The doll was even more beautiful under the bright lights. Every detail perfect. Too perfect. As Sarah set up her photography equipment to document the new acquisition, she could have sworn she saw the doll's chest rise and fall, just once, like a sleeping child taking a deep breath. She blinked hard and looked again. The doll was perfectly still, its painted smile serene and unchanging. "Get it together, Sarah," she muttered to herself. "You're letting that crazy old woman's story get to you." But as she peered through the camera's viewfinder, something made her blood run cold. In the digital display, for just a fraction of a second, the doll's violet eyes had blinked. Sarah spent the next few hours documenting every detail of the doll for the museum's records. Her hands shook slightly as she measured the height, exactly 24 inches, photographed the maker's mark on the back of the neck, faded beyond recognition, and examined the intricate stitching of the dress, hand-sewn with silk thread that had somehow maintained its luster for over a century. By the time she finished, the sun had set, and the lab's fluorescent lights seemed harsh and unnatural. Sarah's neck ached from hunching over her work, and her eyes burned from staring at the computer screen. She glanced at her watch, 8:45 p.m. She hadn't meant to stay so late. As she began packing up her equipment, a soft sound made her freeze. It was barely audible, like the whisper of silk against silk, but in the empty museum, it seemed to echo. Sarah turned slowly toward the doll, which sat propped against a stack of books on her workbench. The doll hadn't moved. Of course it hadn't moved, but something was different. Sarah stared at it, trying to identify what had changed. Then she realized the doll's tiny hands, which had been folded primly in its lap, were now resting palm up on the workbench. "That's impossible," Sarah whispered. She distinctly remembered photographing the doll's hands folded in its lap. She had even noted the delicate painting of the fingernails in her condition report. She pulled up the photos on her computer, and there it was, clear evidence that the doll's hands had indeed been positioned differently. A sudden draft made the papers on her desk flutter. Sarah spun around, but the lab door was closed, and the ventilation system wasn't running. When she turned back to the doll, her heart nearly stopped. The doll's head was turned slightly to the left, those violet eyes fixed directly on her. Sarah stumbled backward, knocking over her chair. It clattered to the floor with a crash that seemed deafening in the quiet building. She waited for the security guard to come running, but then remembered that Jerry didn't start his rounds until 9 p.m. "This isn't happening," she said aloud, her voice shaking. "This is not happening." As if in response, a child's giggle echoed through the lab. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, bouncing off the sterile white walls. Sarah's skin erupted in goosebumps. She grabbed her phone from the desk, fumbling to unlock it. She needed to call someone. Jerry, the police, Madame Beaumont, anyone. But as she raised the phone, its screen flickered and went dark. She pressed the power button frantically, but nothing happened. The lights in the lab flickered once, twice, and then went out completely, plunging the room into darkness. The only illumination came from the streetlights outside, casting long shadows through the high windows. In that dim light, Sarah saw something that made her blood turn to ice. The doll was standing. Its tiny porcelain feet were planted firmly on the workbench, its dress swaying slightly as if in a breeze that Sarah couldn't feel. Its head was cocked to one side at an unnatural angle, and its painted smile had transformed into something else, something hungry. "Would you like to play a game?" The voice was sweet and childlike, but there was something wrong with it, something that made Sarah's teeth ache. It seemed to come from the doll, but the porcelain lips hadn't moved. Sarah backed toward the door, her hands searching blindly for the handle behind her. Her fingers closed around the cold metal, but it wouldn't turn. The door was locked. "Don't leave," the voice said. Violet always left. She never wanted to finish our games. A sound like breaking glass filled the air, and Sarah realized it was the doll giggling. "But you'll play with me, won't you, Sarah?" How do you know my name? Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. The doll took a step forward, its porcelain feet clicking against the metal workbench. I know lots of things. I know you live alone in that tiny apartment on Burgundy Street. I know you talk to your plants because you're lonely. I know you cry sometimes at night, thinking about your sister. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't told anyone about her sister, not since moving to New Orleans 3 years ago. The memory of Emma's accident was too painful to share. Stop it, Sarah said, trying to sound firm despite her terror. You're not real. This isn't real. The doll took another step forward. Oh, but I am real, Sarah. I'm as real as the guilt you carry about Emma. As real as the last words you said to her before she got in that car. The doll's violet eyes seemed to glow in the darkness. What were those words again? I hate you? Sarah's knees gave out, and she slid down the door to the floor. Tears streamed down her face as the doll continued its slow advance across the workbench. How can you know that? She sobbed. Because that's what they all say, in the end, the doll whispered. Angry words they can never take back. Violet said them to her mother. The others said them too, all the ones who tried to own me over the years. And now you're mine, Sarah. We're going to play such wonderful games together. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made them both freeze. Ms. Mitchell? Jerry's voice called through the door. You still here? The lights are acting up again. Sarah opened her mouth to scream for help, but no sound came out. The doll was suddenly right in front of her face, its porcelain hand pressed against her lips. Its touch was cold as death. Shoo, the doll whispered. We wouldn't want to spoil our fun, would we, Ms. Mitchell? Jerry's voice came again, followed by the rattle of keys. I'm gonna unlock the door to check on you. The doll's grip on Sarah's face tightened, its porcelain fingers digging into her skin with impossible strength. Its violet eyes blazed with an inner fire as it leaned close to her ear. If you make a sound, it whispered, I'll make sure Jerry joins our game too. Would you like that? To watch while I play with him? Sarah shook her head frantically, tears streaming down her face. She could hear Jerry fumbling with his keys outside. Suddenly, a memory flashed through Sarah's mind. Something Madame Beaumont had said about keeping the doll in its case, for safety's sake. The glass case was still on her workbench, just a few feet away. If she could somehow... The door handle jiggled. This dang lock, Jerry muttered outside. The doll turned its head toward the sound, momentarily distracted. Sarah seized her chance. With all her strength, she shoved the doll away from her face and lunged for the workbench. Her hip slammed into the metal edge, sending pain shooting through her side, but she didn't stop. Her fingers closed around the heavy glass case just as she heard the doll's feet clicking rapidly across the floor behind her. Bad girl, the doll hissed. Its sweet voice transformed into something ancient and malevolent. Now we'll have to play one of my favorite games. The one where I peel off your skin, 1 inch at a time. Sarah spun around, swinging the glass case like a weapon. The doll leaped at her face, its porcelain features contorted into a mask of rage, tiny hands reaching for her throat with curved, claw-like fingers that hadn't been there before. Sarah screamed and brought the case up between them. The doll slammed into the glass with enough force to knock Sarah backward against the workbench, but she held on, pushing the case down onto the bench and trapping the doll inside. The toy thrashed and howled, its voice shifting between the sweet tones of a child and something much darker, something that spoke in languages that had been dead for centuries. You can't keep me in here, it shrieked, pounding its tiny fists against the glass. I've had 100 owners, played 100 games. They all tried to trap me, to destroy me, but I'm still here. I'll always be here. The door burst open, and Jerry rushed in with his flashlight beam dancing wildly across the walls. Ms. Mitchell, are you okay? I heard screaming. Sarah held the case down with trembling arms as the doll continued to rage inside, but to her amazement, Jerry's flashlight beam showed only a perfectly ordinary porcelain doll, sitting primly with its hands folded in its lap. She looked up at Jerry, then back at the case. The doll was completely still, its painted smile serene and innocent. I'm fine, she managed to say, her voice hoarse. Just thought I saw a rat. Could you help me secure this case? It's a valuable new acquisition, and I want to make sure it's properly sealed before I leave. Jerry helped her fasten the heavy brass clasps on each side of the case, looking curiously at the doll inside. Pretty little thing, isn't it? Looks almost real. Sarah fought back a hysterical laugh. Yes, almost. She could feel the doll's violet eyes burning into her, even though its porcelain face remained perfectly still. Jerry, could you do me a favor? Could you help me carry this down to the secure storage room in the basement? I don't think it should be left up here overnight. As they carried the glass case through the dark museum halls, Sarah could have sworn she heard humming coming from inside. A child's lullaby, sung in a voice that grew older and more twisted with each note. When they reached the storage room, she directed Jerry to place the case in the furthest corner, behind a stack of crates. That night, Sarah didn't go home. Instead, she drove straight to Madame Beaumont's shop, not caring that it was well past midnight. The old woman was waiting for her, as if she'd known Sarah would return. "You knew," Sarah accused, her voice shaking. "You knew what it was, and you sold it to me anyway," Madame Beaumont sighed, suddenly looking very old and very tired. "It had to be passed on. Those are the rules. It must always have an owner, always be safely contained. Each owner keeps it until they can find another soul to take their place." She gave Sarah a sympathetic look. "It chose you, Sherry, just as it chose me 50 years ago. How do I destroy it? You can't. Many have tried. Fire, crushing, even throwing it into the ocean. It always comes back." Madame Beaumont reached out and patted Sarah's trembling hand. "But you're young, strong. You'll find someone else to take it, just as I found you. Until then, keep it in its case. The glass is special, blessed by a voodoo priestess long ago. It can't hurt anyone as long as it stays contained." Sarah left the shop in a daze, driving aimlessly through the French Quarter's empty streets. As the first light of dawn began to paint the sky, she made her decision. The doll would stay in secure storage, behind its blessed glass, until she could find someone else to take it. But until then, she had a responsibility to keep it contained, to prevent it from playing its terrible games with anyone else. Back in the museum's basement, in its dark corner behind the crates, the doll sat perfectly still in its glass prison. Its painted smile seemed to widen slightly as Sarah turned to leave, and a soft humming echoed through the storage room. A lullaby that would continue for days, months, or years, until another curious soul came to listen to its song. Mark Henderson had always considered himself a rational man. As a software engineer, he dealt in logic and clear solutions. If there was a problem, there had to be a reasonable explanation. But the window in his home office was testing that belief. It had started 3 weeks after he moved into the Victorian townhouse in Boston's historic Beacon Hill neighborhood. The house was a steal, especially considering the prime location, though his real estate agent had seemed oddly relieved when he'd signed the papers. Now, as October winds howled outside and leaves scraped against brick walls, he was beginning to understand why. The window itself was unremarkable, a tall, double-hung affair with wavy antique glass and a stubborn wooden frame that had been painted shut countless times over the past century. Mark had spent an entire weekend carefully breaking the seal of old paint and restoring the mechanisms so it would open properly. That hadn't been the problem. The problem was that it wouldn't stay closed. Every morning, without fail, he would enter his office to find the window open exactly 3 inches. Not 2, not 4. Always 3 inches, measured precisely to the millimeter. He'd checked the balance weights, adjusted the sash locks, even installed new weather stripping, but nothing helped. Each morning, that 3-inch gap would greet him like a mocking smile. "There has to be a logical explanation," he muttered, closing the window for what felt like the 100th time that week. The autumn air had left his office frigid, and his coffee had gone cold on his desk. His browser was open to a dozen tabs about old window repair, but none of the solutions he'd found addressed his specific issue. His neighbor, Mrs. Chun, had noticed him working on the window one afternoon. She'd been tending to her window boxes, her white hair caught in the October breeze, when she called out to him. "That window giving you trouble, dear?" Something in her tone had made him pause. "You know about the window?" Mrs. Chun had lived in the neighboring townhouse for 40 years. She'd glanced at his window, then quickly looked away. The Mackenzie girls' room, that was. Before the incident. What incident? Mark had asked, but Mrs. Chan had hurried inside, leaving her gardening tools scattered on her front steps. Now, as evening approached and shadows lengthened across his office floor, Mark found himself thinking about Mrs. Chin's words. He tried researching the house's history, but records from before 1950 were spotty at best. All he managed to find was that a family named Mackenzie had owned the house in the 1940s, and they'd sold it suddenly in 1947. The radiator knocked and pinged as it heated up, making Mark jump. He'd been staring at his computer screen for hours, debugging code for a client, but he'd made little progress. The window seemed to draw his attention like a magnet, pulling his gaze away from his work every few minutes. Outside, the streetlights were starting to come on, casting a sickly yellow glow through the wavy glass. The trees lining the street swayed in the strengthening wind, their nearly bare branches creating shifting shadows on his walls. Mark rubbed his eyes, deciding to call it a day. He'd been working too hard, letting his imagination run wild. Tomorrow, he'd call a professional window installer and be done with it. As he stood to leave, something caught his eye. There, on the window glass, was what looked like writing, letters formed by the condensation that had built up in the cold air. Mark stepped closer, his heart suddenly pounding in his chest. The letters were crude, as if drawn by a child's finger. "Help me." Mark stumbled backward, knocking over his office chair. The words remained for a moment, then slowly faded as the condensation evaporated. He told himself it was a trick of the light, a random pattern in the moisture that his tired mind had interpreted as words. But even as he thought this, he watched in horror as new letters began to form. "I am still here." A high-pitched giggle echoed through the room, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It sounded like a young girl's laugh, but there was something wrong with it, something hollow and desperate that made Mark's skin crawl. The temperature in the room plummeted suddenly, his breath forming clouds in the air. The window began to rattle in its frame, gently at first, then with increasing violence. Mark watched, paralyzed, as the sash lock slowly turned by itself, click by click, until it released. The window flew open with a bang, letting in a gust of frigid air that scattered papers across his desk. But it wasn't the wind that made Mark's blood freeze in his veins. It was what he saw in the glass. Reflected in the antique panes was a face. A young girl, perhaps 12 or 13, with long dark hair and hollow eyes. She wore what looked like a nightgown, and her skin was as pale as milk. She smiled at him, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp, too numerous. "Will you help me?" she asked, her voice echoing as if from the bottom of a well. "Everyone else ignored me, but you fixed my window. You noticed me." Mark ran from the office, slamming the door behind him. He could still hear her giggling, the sound following him down the hallway as he fled down the stairs. But he couldn't escape the terrible certainty that when he returned to his office tomorrow morning, the window would be open exactly 3 inches, and she would be waiting. Mark spent the night on his living room couch, jumping at every creak and groan of the old house. Sleep came in fitful bursts, punctuated by dreams of pale faces in windows and children's laughter echoing down empty corridors. When dawn finally broke, he found himself staring at his office door from the bottom of the stairs, knowing what he would find but dreading the confirmation. The door creaked open at his touch. Cold air hit him immediately. The window was open exactly 3 inches, as he'd known it would be. But something was different this morning. On his desk, arranged in a neat circle, were all the paper clips from his desk organizer. In the center of the circle, written in his own red pen, were the words, "Find me." Mark's hands shook as he approached the desk. The paper clips weren't just arranged in a circle. They spelled out numbers. 194700603. June 3, 1947. The date meant something. It had to. Despite his terror, Mark's logical mind began to work. He needed information, needed to understand what was happening. Mrs. Chen might have answers, but she'd made it clear she didn't want to talk about it. The local library, then? They would have newspaper archives. He grabbed his laptop bag, careful not to disturb the paper clips, and hurried out of the house. The autumn morning was crisp and bright, making the events of the night seem almost dreamlike. Almost, but not quite, because when he glanced back at his office window, he saw a small handprint on the glass, too small to be his own. The Boston Public Library was quiet at this early hour. The reference librarian, an elderly woman named Ms. Winters, peered at him over her reading glasses as he explained what he was looking for. The Mackenzie house? My goodness, I haven't heard anyone ask about that in years. She led him to a microfilm reader. June 1947, you said? Let me see what I can find. As she scrolled through the archived newspapers, Mark's heart nearly stopped. There, on the front page of the June 4, 1947 edition, was the headline, "Local Girl Missing from Beacon Hill Home." The article told the story of 13-year-old Elizabeth Mackenzie, who had vanished from her bedroom during the night of June 3rd. The police had found no signs of forced entry, though oddly, her bedroom window had been open exactly 3 inches. The girl's mother reported that Elizabeth had been troubled in the weeks before her disappearance, complaining about noises in her room and begging to sleep elsewhere. The Mackenzie case, Ms. Winters said softly. I remember when it happened. I was just a girl myself. They never found her, you know? The parents moved away shortly after. Couldn't bear to stay in the house. Mark's mouth was dry. Was there anything else? Any other articles? Ms. Winters hesitated. There was one more thing, but it wasn't in the papers. My mother was friends with the cleaning lady who worked for the Mackenzies. She said that after Elizabeth disappeared, they found something strange in her room. The girl had been keeping a diary, and in the last entry, she paused, looking troubled. Well, she wrote about a voice that called to her through the window at night. A voice that promised to be her friend, promised to take her somewhere special if she would just open the window 3 inches. Not 2, not 4. Exactly 3 inches. Mark felt the blood drain from his face. What happened to the diary? Lost, I suppose. The police took it as evidence, but the case went cold. Ms. Winters studied his face. You're living in that house now, aren't you? In Elizabeth's old room? Before Mark could respond, his phone buzzed. It was a text from his home security system. Motion detected. Office. The attached image made his heart stop. There, captured in the grainy security footage, was a figure standing at his office window. Not outside, inside. It appeared to be a young girl in a nightgown, but the image was distorted, stretched, wrong. As he watched, another text came through. Motion detected. Office. This time, the figure was turned toward the camera. Where her face should have been was only a dark void, like a hole torn in reality. I have to go, Mark stammered, gathering his things. Wait, Ms. Winters called after him. There's something else you should know. Something my mother's friend said about the cleaning lady's last day at the house. She quit after finding something behind the wallpaper in Elizabeth's room. She never said exactly what it was, but she did say one thing. The librarian's voice dropped to a whisper. She said there were other diaries, older ones, all belonging to young girls, all ending the same way. Mark ran from the library, his mind racing. The security system kept sending notifications, each image more distorted than the last. In the final one, the figure was pressed against the camera, her hollow face filling the frame, and below it, a message had been written in the dust on his desk. You're getting closer. Keep looking. He had to go back, had to face whatever was waiting in that room, because now he understood. Elizabeth hadn't been the first, and if he didn't figure out what was happening, she wouldn't be the last. The sun was setting by the time he reached his house, painting the sky in shades of blood and bruise. As he stood on his front steps, gathering his courage, he heard Mrs. Chin's voice from next door. I was there, you know, she said quietly, the night Elizabeth disappeared. I was only 10, but I saw something at her window. Something that wasn't Elizabeth at all. Mark turned to her slowly. What was it? Mrs. Chin's eyes were distant, focused on memories she tried for decades to forget. A shadow, shaped like a girl but wrong. And behind it, other shadows. So many others. All reaching, all calling. And Elizabeth was reaching back. The last light of day was fading as Mark climbed the stairs to his office, Mrs. Chin's words echoing in his mind. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the very air was becoming dense, resistant. The temperature dropped noticeably as he approached his office door, and he could hear a soft humming coming from inside, a lullaby sung in a child's voice. When he pushed open the door, his office was transformed. The walls, previously a neutral beige, were now covered in faded pink wallpaper, peeling at the corners to reveal older layers beneath. His modern desk had been replaced by a delicate white vanity, its mirror clouded with age. And there, at the window, stood a young girl in a nightgown. Elizabeth? Mark's voice trembled. The figure turned, and Mark stumbled backward. It had Elizabeth's form, her long dark hair, but its face was a shifting void, like static on an old television. Through that static, other faces flickered, dozens of them, all young girls, all with expressions of eternal terror. Not just Elizabeth, the figure said, its voice a chorus of children's whispers. All of us. Every girl who ever opened the window 3 inches. Every child who listened to the whispers in the dark. The figure glided toward him, leaving trails of shadow in the air. Do you want to know why 3 inches, Mark? Would you like to know our secret? Mark's back hit the hallway wall. He wanted to run, but his legs wouldn't move. What are you? We are the spaces in between, the figure said, its voice growing deeper, older. The gaps in the world where children can slip through. 3 inches, the perfect width for a young soul to squeeze out of reality. It laughed, the sound like breaking glass. But we need anchors, you see, bodies to hold our place in this world. Elizabeth was perfect. They all were. Young, lonely, ready to believe in friends who called through windows at night. The room began to twist, the wallpaper peeling away in long strips to reveal hundreds of names written on the plaster beneath, dates stretching back centuries. And behind those names, visible through cracks in the wall itself, were the diaries. Dozens of them, their pages filled with the same desperate words. They call to me at night. They promise we'll be friends forever. All I have to do is open the window. But you're different, Mark, the figure said, now inches from his face. You're not a child. You're not lonely. You're something much more valuable. You're curious. You've looked deeper than anyone else. And now you can help us. Help you. Mark managed to whisper. Find more children. Break the pattern. We're so tired of waiting for them to come to us. The figure's void face split into a grin that stretched too wide, filled with darkness. With your help, we can open windows everywhere. 3 inches. That's all we need. 3 inches to slip into their rooms, their dreams, their world. And suddenly, Mark understood. This wasn't just about Elizabeth or the girls who came before her. This was about something ancient and patient, using the window as a door, using children as bait, growing stronger with each soul it collected. And now it wanted to expand its hunting ground. In that moment of clarity, Mark also understood what he had to do. No, he said firmly, his voice steadier than he felt. The figure tilted its head at an impossible angle. No, you can't have any more children, Mark said. And you can't have this window either. Before the figure could react, Mark lunged past it to his desk. In his laptop bag was a small can of paint he'd bought weeks ago, planning to reseal the window. But this paint was special, mixed with blessed salt and holy water, a precaution inspired by too many late-night readings about the house's history. The figure screamed as Mark began painting the window frame, its form distorting, stretching. The other faces in its void features screamed too. Elizabeth, all the girls, their voices a chorus of rage and desperation. You can't stop us, it shrieked. We are eternal. We are. Mark completed the seal around the window frame, and the figure's scream cut off abruptly. The room spun, reality twisting back into place. His modern office reappeared, but the window was different. The glass had turned black as night, and in its surface, he could see faces pressing against it from the other side, their hands leaving frost-like prints that faded slowly. The window never opened again. Mark made sure of that, adding lock after lock, blessing after blessing. Sometimes at night, he still hears them. The whispers, the giggles, the soft singing of lullabies. But they're muffled now, distant, trapped behind glass and paint and prayers. Mrs. Cheon helped him research the house's history properly. They found death certificates, missing persons reports, diary fragments, evidence of a pattern stretching back to the house's construction. All those girls, all those open windows. Elizabeth was just one of many, but she would be the last. The window that wouldn't stay shut was finally, permanently closed. Yet sometimes, on cold nights when the wind howls down Beacon Hill's narrow streets, Mark sits in his office and watches the black glass. And sometimes, just sometimes, he sees Elizabeth's face among the others. She doesn't look angry anymore. She looks peaceful, free. But he never, ever measures the space between the window and its frame. Some measurements are better left untaken, some gaps better left unmeasured. After all, 3 inches isn't much. Unless you're trying to slip between worlds. Detective Lisa Chen stared at her phone as it buzzed across her desk, displaying a number she hadn't seen in 15 years. A number that shouldn't exist anymore. Her partner, Mike Rodriguez, glanced up from his paperwork. "You gonna answer that?" Lisa's hand trembled as she reached for the phone. The number on the screen belonged to her sister, Amy. Amy, who had been found dead in her apartment 15 years ago. Amy, whose phone had been disconnected and number reassigned years ago. She checked, obsessively, until she was sure no one else would ever have that number. She hit the answer button. "Hello?" Static crackled through the speaker, then resolved into a voice she'd heard only in her dreams for the past 15 years. "Lisa, I need your help. Something's wrong with the case." Lisa's coffee cup slipped from her other hand, shattering on the precinct floor. Rodriguez jumped up, but she waved him away, pressing the phone harder against her ear. "This isn't possible," she whispered. "Amy died. I identified your body." A sound like distant wind came through the phone. "Did you? Did you really look closely, Lisa? Or did you see what they wanted you to see?" The voice was Amy's, exactly as Lisa remembered it, down to the slight stutter on S sounds that their parents had tried for years to correct. But there was something else underneath it, a hollow quality that made Lisa's skin crawl. "Who is this?" Lisa demanded, her detective's instincts finally kicking in. "This isn't funny. Check the case file," Amy's voice said. "Box 2247, B in evidence storage. Look at the photos again. Look at what's in the mirror." "What mirror?" "There was no mirror in your..." But the line went dead. Rodriguez was standing over her desk now, concern etched on his face. "Lisa, you look like you've seen a ghost." "Not seen," she said, her voice shaking. "Heard." She looked up at her partner of 5 years, the only person in the precinct who knew the full story of what had happened to her sister. That was Amy's number. Amy's voice. Rodriguez ran a hand through his graying hair. "That's not possible. Your sister's case was 15 years ago." "I know." Lisa was already pulling up the evidence database on her computer. But she mentioned something specific. Box 2247B. That's got to mean something. The evidence database confirmed that Box 2247B was indeed from Amy's case, still stored in the basement evidence room. It hadn't been accessed since the case was officially closed as a suicide in 2009. A suicide Lisa had never believed in. Amy had been found in her bathtub, wrists cut, the water tinged pink. A classic suicide scene, except for one detail that had always nagged at Lisa. Amy was afraid of blood. She couldn't even handle paper cuts without fainting. The idea that she would choose that method seemed wrong. But Lisa had been a rookie cop then, not yet a detective. Her concerns had been dismissed by the investigating officers. Even their parents had accepted the ruling, too overwhelmed by grief to question it. "I need to see that box," Lisa said, standing up. Rodriguez grabbed his jacket. "I'm coming with you. If this is some sick prank, I want to be there when you find out who's behind it." The evidence room was cold and smelled of dust and old paper. The clerk, a new guy Lisa didn't recognize, took his time checking their credentials before leading them to the correct aisle. Box 2247B was exactly where it should be, covered in 15 years of dust. Lisa pulled on latex gloves before lifting the lid, her heart pounding. The contents were familiar. She'd gone over them countless times during her own private investigation in the years following Amy's death. Crime scene photos, evidence bags containing Amy's clothes, the razor blade found in the tub. Look at what's in the mirror. Amy's voice echoed in her memory. Lisa spread out the crime scene photos on a nearby table. Most of them she knew by heart: the bathroom door, the tub, Amy's body. But then she saw something that made her blood run cold. In one photo, taken from the bathroom doorway, there was a mirror on the wall opposite the tub. She'd never paid attention to it before, too focused on other details. But now, squinting at the grainy image, she could see something reflected in that mirror. Something that shouldn't have been there. In the mirror's reflection, Amy was sitting up in the tub, eyes wide open, staring directly at the camera. But in the actual tub, captured in the same photograph, her body was slumped forward, face down in the water. "Rodriguez," Lisa whispered, her hands shaking. "Look at this." Her partner leaned in, then jerked back. That's not possible." Lisa's phone buzzed again. Amy's number. This time, when she answered, the static was louder, almost drowning out the voice. "Now you see. But that's just the beginning, Lisa. You need to find the others." "What others?" "The ones who came before. The ones who came after. We're all here, waiting. Look for the mirrors, Lisa. Always look for the mirrors." The line went dead again, but this time, Lisa's phone screen remained lit, displaying a text message from Amy's number. It contained a single image, a newspaper clipping from 3 months before Amy's death, showing another young woman found dead in her bathtub. In the background of the crime scene photo, barely visible, was a mirror, and in its reflection, a face that didn't belong to the victim was staring back at the camera. "Jesus," Rodriguez breathed, looking at the image over Lisa's shoulder. "What the hell is going on?" Lisa's phone buzzed one more time. Another text. "Find us, Lisa. Find us before they do it again. And whatever you do, don't look too long in any mirrors. They can see you looking back." Lisa spent the next 48 hours digging through old case files. Her dining room table disappeared under stacks of papers as she traced a pattern that made her stomach churn. Every 3 months for the past 20 years, a young woman had been found dead in her bathtub. Each death ruled a suicide. Each crime scene containing a mirror. And in every photo where that mirror was visible, something was wrong with the reflection. Rodriguez brought coffee and helped her organize the files. 17 victims, he said, pinning photos to an improvised evidence board. All between 25 and 30. All found in bathtubs. All with mirrors in the bathroom. And all investigated by the same detective, Lisa added, holding up a personnel file. "Detective James Morrison. Retired 5 years ago." "Morrison?" Rodriguez frowned. "He worked my first case when I joined homicide. Real by-the-book guy. Closed cases fast. Too fast." Lisa stood up, stretching her stiff muscles. She hadn't slept since the phone call, couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Amy's face in that mirror, staring out at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Warning? Accusation? Fear? Her phone buzzed again. Amy's number had been calling regularly, each conversation filled with static and cryptic warnings. This time, though, it was a text message with an address, 1247 Maple Street. "Morrison's home address," Lisa whispered. "Lisa, wait." Rodriguez grabbed her arm. "Think about this. We're talking about a respected detective. We can't just—" Her phone buzzed again. Another image. A mirror selfie of a young woman Lisa didn't recognize, smiling at her phone. The text beneath it read, "Rachel Palmer. She's next. Tonight." Lisa showed Rodriguez the phone. "Still want to wait?" They took Lisa's unmarked car, driving through streets slick with early evening rain. The address turned out to be a small ranch house in the suburbs, its windows dark except for a faint blue television glow in what must be the living room. Morrison opened the door on the third knock. He was older than in his personnel photo, his face lined and gray, but his eyes were sharp as they took in Lisa's badge. "Detective Chin? What brings you out here?" Lisa held up the crime scene photo from Amy's case. "We need to talk about the mirrors." Detective Morrison, the color drained from his face. For a moment, Lisa thought he might try to slam the door, but instead, his shoulders slumped. I wondered if someone would finally notice. He stepped back, gesturing for them to enter. "Come in." But don't look too closely at any mirrors. They might notice you looking. Morrison's living room was dim, all the mirrors covered with sheets. He led them to a cluttered study where case files and photographs covered every surface. But these weren't official police photos. They were older, much older. Some looked like they dated back to the 1800s. It's always the same, Morrison said, his voice tired. Every 3 months. Always a mirror. Always a young woman. I tried to stop it, tried to warn them, but who would believe me? So I took the cases, made sure they were ruled suicides, kept others from looking too closely. You covered up murders? Rodriguez's hand moved toward his weapon. Murders? Morrison laughed, a hollow sound. If only it were that simple. Look. He pulled out a photograph, yellowed with age. It showed a Victorian bathroom, a woman slumped in a copper tub, and in the mirror, "Oh God," Lisa whispered. The reflection showed not one figure, but dozens, all reaching toward the camera with distorted limbs, their faces twisted in eternal screams. They live in the mirrors, Morrison said, have for centuries. They need to feed every 3 months. If they don't get their victim, he pulled back his sleeve, revealing deep scars on his wrists. They try to take someone else. Anyone who knows too much. Anyone who looks too long. Lisa's phone buzzed. A text from Amy. He's lying. Not about everything, but enough. Ask him about the ritual. What ritual? Lisa demanded, showing Morrison the text. The old detective's face went slack with fear. You've been talking to them? No, no, no. You don't understand. They're not your loved ones. They just wear their faces, use their voices. The real ritual. He stumbled to a filing cabinet, yanking open a drawer. It's all here. Everything I learned. Everything they didn't want me to know. But before he could pull out the file, every mirror in the house shattered simultaneously. Even the computer screens, the windows, the glass and picture frames. Any reflective surface exploded inward. And in each shard, Lisa saw faces. Hundreds of faces, including Amy's. They're here, Morrison whispered. The lights went out, plunging them into darkness broken only by the glow of Lisa's phone. On its screen, one final message appeared. Run. The darkness in Morrison's house was absolute, but the reflections weren't coming from the mirrors anymore. They were coming from the darkness itself. Faces formed in the shadows, twisted and distorted, reaching out with limbs that seemed too long, too jointed. The basement, Morrison shouted, shoving a key into Lisa's hand. The real files are in the safe. You have to. His voice cut off in a gurgle. In the dim light of her phone, Lisa saw dark shapes wrapping around him like smoke, pulling him into the darkness. Rodriguez fired his weapon, but the bullets passed through the shadows harmlessly. Lisa, run, he yelled, pushing her toward the basement door. I'll hold them. But then he too was gone, swallowed by the writhing darkness. Lisa ran, her heart pounding. The basement stairs creaked under her feet as she descended, her phone's light casting wild shadows. Behind her, she could hear whispers, hundreds of voices speaking in languages she didn't understand. The safe was behind an old painting, a typical hiding place, but she didn't have time to appreciate the irony. Her hands shook as she turned the key in the lock. Inside was a single manila envelope, its edges yellowed with age. Her phone buzzed. Amy's voice came through clearly this time. No static. Read it quickly. You don't have much time. Lisa tore open the envelope. Inside were photographs and documents dating back to 1847. They told a story that made her blood run cold. A group of wealthy men, dabbling in dark magic, seeking immortality. They had found a way to trap souls in mirrors, feeding off their energy to extend their own lives. But the spell required regular sacrifices. Young women, killed in specific ways, their souls trapped between worlds. But there was more. The trapped souls weren't just victims. They were becoming something else, something stronger. With each new sacrifice, their power grew. And now we're strong enough to fight back, Amy's voice said from behind her. Lisa turned. In the basement's darkness stood a figure that both was and wasn't her sister. Amy's face was there, but behind it were others. hundreds of women's faces, all overlapping, all moving independently. The men who did this, Amy said, they're still alive, still young. Morrison worked for them, finding victims, covering their tracks. But he grew a conscience, started keeping records. And now, the basement door burst open. Light flooded down the stairs, but it was wrong. Too bright, too sharp. 3 men in expensive suits descended, their faces unnaturally smooth and young for their obvious age. Detective Chun, the first man said, his voice like oil. You've caused quite a mess, but we can still fix this. Your sister can rest. Your partner can live. All you have to do is give us those files. Don't listen, Amy's voice whispered. We're stronger now, but we need you. A living soul, freely given, to tip the balance. Lisa looked at the men, the real monsters who had killed her sister and so many others. Then she looked at what her sister had become, this composite of hundreds of trapped souls. The choice should have been impossible, but it wasn't. Amy, she said, I believe in you. Lisa turned her back on the men and stepped into her sister's embrace. The sensation was like falling into ice water, her soul separating from her body. But she remained conscious, aware, as her perspective shifted. Suddenly, she could see everything. Every mirror, every reflection, every trapped soul now united into something vast and powerful. The men screamed as their centuries of stolen youth caught up with them in an instant. They aged and crumbled to dust in seconds, their own reflections turning against them, showing their true faces before they disintegrated. In the stories afterwards, no one could quite explain what happened. They found Lisa's body in Morrison's basement, alongside Rodriguez and Morrison himself. The official report listed carbon monoxide poisoning from a faulty furnace. 3 prominent businessmen disappeared that same night, though their bodies were never found. But there were other changes too. Women across the city reported strange dreams of being protected, watched over by countless unseen guardians. Mirrors in the homes of abusers mysteriously shattered. Young women walking alone at night glimpsed protective reflections walking alongside them. Hundreds of faces, all moving in unison, keeping them safe. And sometimes, late at night, in the mirrors of the city's bathrooms, a particular reflection appears to those in danger. A detective's face, alongside her sister's and hundreds of others. They whisper warnings. They offer protection. They watch. They wait. They remember. Because the thing about mirrors is that they don't just show reflections. They show the truth, if you know how to look. And the truth is, some souls never truly die. They just find a different way to protect the living. In a small cemetery on the outskirts of the city, there's a gravestone that reads, Lisa Chun. She chose justice. On its polished surface, if you look at just the right angle, you might see a reflection that doesn't match the world around it. A woman in a detective's badge, standing proud among hundreds of others, still protecting the innocent, still solving cases, still making sure no other sisters have to lose each other to the darkness. Just don't look too long. Some reflections look back. Every town has its legends, but in Millbrook, they all centered around the old Clocktower. Rising above the town square like a Gothic sentinel, its black iron hands had been frozen at 3:33 for as long as anyone could remember. Local children whispered that if you stood beneath it at exactly 3:33, either AM or PM, you could hear a girl crying. Emma Spencer, the new town historian, had heard all the stories within her first week of moving to Millbrook. But it wasn't until she started researching the tower's history that she began to take them seriously. The clockmaker's daughter, Mrs. Henderson, the elderly librarian, told her one rainy October afternoon, Charlotte Vale. She disappeared in 1888 on her 13th birthday. They say her father went mad trying to find her, spending his remaining days working on the clock, convinced somehow that if he could make it keep perfect time, she'd return. Emma was cataloging the town's historical documents when she found the first real evidence that Charlotte Vale had actually existed. It was a yellowed newspaper clipping, dated March 33, 1888. A misprint, surely, as March has only 31 days. The article described the disappearance of young Miss Vale, last seen ascending the Clocktower steps with her father's latest mechanical creation, a music box of peculiar design. The more Emma dug, the stranger the story became. Theodore Vale hadn't just been the town clockmaker. He'd been a mechanical genius whose creations bordered on the impossible. His notebooks, preserved in the library's archives, contained designs for devices that seemed centuries ahead of their time, and some that seemed to defy the laws of physics altogether. "You shouldn't look too deeply into this," Mrs. Henderson warned when she caught Emma poring over the notebooks. "Some histories are better left buried." But Emma couldn't stop. The mysteries kept piling up. Why did all the original blueprints for the Clocktower show 13 floors when the building clearly only had 12? Why did Theodore Vale's final journal entry, written the day before his death in 1889, contain the cryptic message, "The gears turn backwards at 3:33. The music box opens the way. My Charlotte still sings?" On a cold Tuesday in late October, Emma finally found her way into the Clocktower itself. The mayor had been reluctant to give her access, citing safety concerns, but her historical society credentials and persistence had eventually won out. The interior was a marvel of Victorian engineering, albeit covered in decades of dust. Massive gears lined the walls, their brass surfaces dulled with age. The wooden stairs creaked under her feet as she ascended, her flashlight beam catching cobwebs and shadows. At the 12th floor, she found the clock mechanism itself, an intricate symphony of wheels, escapements, and counterweights, all perfectly preserved despite their long silence. But something wasn't right. The mechanism seemed to extend both up and down, as if it continued beyond both the floor and ceiling. Emma's flashlight caught something carved into the wall, a small indentation in the shape of a music box. Her heart began to race. 2 weeks ago, she'd found something in Theodore Vale's house, now a deteriorating mansion on the edge of town. In a hidden compartment beneath his workbench, there had been a music box, a beautiful brass and copper creation covered in intricate gears and clockwork. She brought it with her today, more out of intuition than any real plan. Now, standing before that indentation, she pulled the music box from her bag. It fit perfectly into the wall. The moment it clicked into place, the entire tower shuddered. Gears that had been silent for over a century suddenly groaned to life. The clock hands outside began to move, not forward, but backward, spinning faster and faster. Emma checked her phone. 3:32 p.m. As the second hand ticked toward 3:33, she heard something above her, a sound that shouldn't have been possible on the top floor of a 12-story tower. Footsteps and singing. A child's voice, sweet and clear, singing a lullaby that hadn't been heard in over 100 years. The phone display changed to 3:33, and the floor beneath Emma's feet became transparent, revealing an impossible space between the gears, a 13th floor that existed outside of normal space and time. And there, looking up at her through the ghostly floor, was a young girl in a Victorian dress. "Have you come to play?" Charlotte Vale asked, her voice echoing strangely through the mechanical forest of grinding gears. "Father said someone would come, eventually. Someone who could hear the music." She smiled, but there was something wrong with that smile. Something that suggested those 135 years alone in the Clocktower had changed her into something not quite human anymore. "Will you join me in my clockwork world? The gears turn so beautifully here, and time works differently. I have so many games to show you." The transparent floor beneath Emma's feet began to crack like ice. The transparent floor shattered like crystal, but instead of falling, Emma found herself suspended in a space that defied physics. All around her, massive gears turned in impossible directions, their brass teeth meshing in patterns that seemed to form ever-shifting corridors and rooms. The air hummed with mechanical music, as if the entire space was one giant music box. Charlotte floated nearby, her Victorian dress billowing around her as if underwater. In this strange light, Emma could see that the girl's skin had taken on a metallic sheen, and her eyes were clockwork, pupils dilating and contracting like camera apertures. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Charlotte gestured at the mechanical wonderland around them. "Father built it for me. He said the normal world was too cruel, too chaotic. Here, everything moves according to perfect mathematical precision, even time itself." Emma tried to speak, but her voice came out distorted, as if played through an old phonograph. "What happened to you, Charlotte?" The girl's mechanical eyes whirred as they focused on Emma. "I was sick, dying. Father couldn't bear to lose me, so he found a way to save me. He discovered that reality has gears, just like his clocks, and if you know how to adjust them." She reached out and touched a nearby gear, causing the entire space to shift and reorganize. "You can create spaces between spaces, times between times." Charlotte drifted closer, and Emma noticed that her movements weren't quite natural. They were precise, rhythmic, like a well-oiled machine. "But Father didn't understand what his creation would do to me. The longer I stayed here, the more I became part of the mechanism. And now—" She held up her hand, and Emma watched in horror as the skin became transparent, revealing intricate gears and springs beneath. "I'm not really Charlotte anymore. Not entirely. I'm something else. Something that lives in the spaces between tick and tock." Emma's research instincts fought with her rising terror. The other children, the ones who've gone missing over the years when they heard crying from the tower. What happened to them? Charlotte's smile became sad, though it was hard to tell if the emotion was genuine or just another mechanical function. "I was lonely. So lonely. I invited them to play. Some of them are still here, in their own ways." She gestured to the gears around them, and Emma noticed for the first time that some of them had faces worked into their brass surfaces. Young faces, frozen in expressions of wonder or fear. "They're part of the clock now," Charlotte said matter-of-factly. "Part of me. We keep time together, in our own special way." She floated to a particularly large gear and stroked its surface. A child's laughter echoed through the mechanical space, but it was distorted, metallic. "Your father," Emma said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Did he know what would happen?" "Father." Charlotte's laugh was like chimes in the wind. "Oh, he joined us too in the end. He's here somewhere." She spun in place, her dress swirling around her. "Playing his own part in the great machine. Would you like to meet him?" Before Emma could respond, the space shifted again. The gears rearranged themselves into a vast chamber, and there, suspended in the center, was a human figure fused with the clockwork. Theodore Vale's face was still recognizable, though now cast in brass, his eyes replaced with ticking chronometers, his mouth forever frozen in an expression of horrified revelation. "He understood too late," Charlotte said, floating up to touch her father's metallic cheek. "By then, I wasn't his daughter anymore. I was the heart of the clock, and the clock needed more components." Emma began to notice a pulling sensation, as if the gears around her were trying to draw her in. Looking down at her hands, she saw her skin beginning to take on a metallic sheen. "Don't fight it," Charlotte whispered, suddenly very close. "It doesn't hurt, becoming part of the mechanism. And think of the history you'll witness from in here. Every tick, every tock, watching the town change through our windows while we remain perfect and unchanging." The mechanical transformation was creeping up Emma's arms now. She could feel gears beginning to form beneath her skin, could hear the ticking of tiny clockwork in her veins. "Please," Emma gasped. "I don't want—" "What anyone wants doesn't matter here," Charlotte said, her voice taking on the same hollow quality as the metallic laughter that still echoed through the chamber. "Time is the only true force, and time has chosen you to join our collection. Just like it chose me. Just like it chose all of us." The walls of gears began to close in, and Emma saw her reflection in their polished surfaces, saw her eyes beginning to turn to clockwork, just like Charlotte's, just like all the others who had heard the crying from the tower and come to investigate, just like everyone who had tried to uncover the truth about Charlotte Vale. As the clockwork infection spread through her body, Emma's historian's mind remained clear enough to recognize patterns. Throughout her research, one detail had always bothered her. March 33, 1888. An impossible date. A breakdown in the natural order of time. Charlotte drifted closer, and Emma noticed that her movements weren't quite natural. They were precise, rhythmic, like a well-oiled machine. "But Father didn't understand what his creation would do to me. The longer I stayed here, the more I became part of the mechanism. And now—" She held up her hand, and Emma watched in horror as the skin became transparent, revealing intricate gears and springs beneath. I'm not really Charlotte anymore. Not entirely. I'm something else. Something that lives in the spaces between tick and tock. Emma's research instincts fought with her rising terror. The other children, the ones who've gone missing over the years when they heard crying from the tower. What happened to them? Charlotte's smile became sad, though it was hard to tell if the emotion was genuine or just another mechanical function. I was lonely. So lonely. I invited them to play. Some of them are still here, in their own ways. She gestured to the gears around them, and Emma noticed for the first time that some of them had faces worked into their brass surfaces. Young faces, frozen in expressions of wonder or fear. They're part of the clock now, Charlotte said matter-of-factly. Part of me. We keep time together, in our own special way. She floated to a particularly large gear and stroked its surface. A child's laughter echoed through the mechanical space, but it was distorted, metallic. Your father, Emma said, trying to keep her voice steady. Did he know what would happen? Father. Charlotte's laugh was like chimes in the wind. Oh, he joined us too in the end. He's here somewhere. She spun in place, her dress swirling around her, playing his own part in the great machine. Would you like to meet him? Before Emma could respond, the space shifted again. The gears rearranged themselves into a vast chamber, and there, suspended in the center, was a human figure fused with the clockwork. Theodore Vale's face was still recognizable, though now cast in brass, his eyes replaced with ticking chronometers, his mouth forever frozen in an expression of horrified revelation. He understood too late, Charlotte said, floating up to touch her father's metallic cheek. By then, I wasn't his daughter anymore. I was the heart of the clock, and the clock needed more components. Emma began to notice a pulling sensation, as if the gears around her were trying to draw her in. Looking down at her hands, she saw her skin beginning to take on a metallic sheen. Don't fight it, Charlotte whispered, suddenly very close. It doesn't hurt, becoming part of the mechanism. And think of the history you'll witness from in here. Every tick, every tock, watching the town change through our windows while we remain perfect and unchanging. The mechanical transformation was creeping up Emma's arms now. She could feel gears beginning to form beneath her skin, could hear the ticking of tiny clockwork in her veins. Please, Emma gasped. I don't want. What anyone wants doesn't matter here, Charlotte said, her voice taking on the same hollow quality as the metallic laughter that still echoed through the chamber. Time is the only true force, and time has chosen you to join our collection. Just like it chose me. Just like it chose all of us. The walls of gears began to close in, and Emma saw her reflection in their polished surfaces, saw her eyes beginning to turn to clockwork, just like Charlotte's, just like all the others who had heard the crying from the tower and come to investigate, just like everyone who had tried to uncover the truth about Charlotte Vale. As the clockwork infection spread through her body, Emma's historian's mind remained clear enough to recognize patterns. Throughout her research, one detail had always bothered her. March 33, 1888. An impossible date. A breakdown in the natural order of time. Just like this place. Wait, Emma called out, her voice now carrying a metallic resonance. Charlotte, you said your father discovered that reality has gears. But what if he was wrong? What if he didn't build this place at all? Charlotte paused in her approach, head tilting at an unnatural angle. What do you mean? The Clocktower existed before you were sick, before your father ever started his experiments. What if? Emma fought against the mechanical transformation crawling up her neck, forcing the words out. What if the tower chose your father, not the other way around? What if it's been here all along, waiting, feeding? The massive chamber of gears seemed to shudder at her words. Charlotte's clockwork eyes spun rapidly, showing the first signs of uncertainty Emma had seen. That's not. Father built this. He built it for me. To save me. But her voice wavered, gears grinding beneath the sound. Did he? Emma pressed, even as she felt cogs beginning to form behind her own eyes. Or did something else save you? Something that needed a child's innocence to lure others in? Something that feeds on human time? The brass face of Theodore Vale seemed to twist in its mechanical prison, his chronometer eyes spinning wildly. A deep grinding sound filled the chamber, like the protest of ancient machinery. The music box, Emma continued, fighting to hold on to her humanity. It's not just a key, is it? It's a warning. The melody, I finally recognized it. It's Time in a Bottle. But that song wasn't written until 1972, nearly a century after your father supposedly built the box. Charlotte's form flickered, like a gear slipping out of alignment. That's not. I don't. For a moment, her mechanical face seemed to crack, revealing something ancient and horrible beneath. Something that had never been human at all. This place isn't a sanctuary, Emma said, her voice growing stronger as understanding flooded her. It's a trap, a pocket in time where something feeds on human lives, turning them into energy to keep itself running. And you, Charlotte, you're not really Charlotte anymore, are you? You're just the bait it uses, the crying child that draws them in. The chamber erupted in chaos. Gears began spinning in reverse, throwing off sparks. The metallic faces and their surfaces screamed with voices that were finally, terribly human again. Theodore Vale's brass face contorted in a silent scream of recognition. Charlotte's form was changing, shifting between the innocent girl she appeared to be and something else. A creature of pure mechanism, ancient and hungry, its true form too geometric and terrible for human eyes to comprehend. Clever girl, it said, Charlotte's voice now overlaid with the sound of grinding metal. But knowing the truth won't save you. Time only flows one way in your world. Here, I am time itself. I am the space between seconds, the hunger in the heart of every clock. And you belong to me now. But Emma had one last card to play. Throughout her transformation, she'd kept one hand in her pocket, clutching something she'd found in Theodore Vale's notebooks. A single gear, inscribed with symbols that had taken her weeks to translate. Words that seemed meaningless until now. Time flows both ways at 3:33. The heart of the clock beats in reverse. With the last of her human strength, she pulled out the gear and held it up. Your time's up, she whispered, and threw it into the nearest mechanism. The effect was instantaneous. The entire chamber convulsed as the gear's reversed teeth caught in the ancient machinery. Time began to flow backward, then forward, then in both directions at once. Emma felt the clockwork infection begin to retreat from her body as reality itself seemed to tear apart around them. The creature that had been Charlotte screamed with 1,000 mechanical voices. What have you done? Your mistake, Emma gasped. Feeling her humanity returning was turning me into part of the mechanism. Now I'm part of the clock. I can feel how it works. And I'm shutting it down. The chamber began to collapse in on itself, gears flying apart, the faces and their surfaces breaking free one by one. Emma saw children from different eras emerging from the machinery, dazed but human again. Theodore Vale's brass prison shattered, his now human form slumping to the ground. And in the center of it all, the thing that had pretended to be Charlotte was coming apart, its true form too massive and terrible to maintain itself as the pocket dimension collapsed. Through the chaos, Emma caught glimpses of its real shape, an infinite recursion of gears and wheels, a machine that had been old when the earth was young. You can't destroy time itself, it howled as it disintegrated. No, Emma agreed, watching as reality reasserted itself around them. But I can set it flowing in the right direction again. The world bent, twisted, and suddenly Emma was standing on the 12th floor of the Clocktower again. Sunlight streamed through the windows, and the air was filled with the sound she'd never heard before in Millbrook. The sound of the clock ticking normally, its hands moving forward at last. The music box was gone from the wall, along with the hidden mechanism it had unlocked. Around her lay the others who had been trapped, children from throughout the decades, all restored to their proper ages and times. They would have stories to tell, families to return to, lives to piece back together. Theodore Vale was there too, an old man now, as he should have been. He looked at Emma with tears in his eyes. My Charlotte, my real Charlotte. She really did die, didn't she? Emma helped him to his feet. Yes, but that thing in the clock, that was never her. You know that now. In the weeks that followed, Millbrook would struggle to comprehend what had happened. Dozens of missing persons cases were suddenly solved, though the explanations had to be carefully crafted. The clock tower still stands in the town square, but now it keeps perfect time, its hands moving steadily forward as they should. Sometimes, late at night, Emma thinks she can still hear a faint ticking in her blood, a remnant of her time as part of the mechanism. But it's growing fainter, fading like a dream. The town children still tell stories about the clock tower, but they're different now. They say that if you listen carefully at 3:33, you can hear the sound of chains breaking, of cages opening, of time itself being set free. And in the town library, in a sealed box that will never be opened again, a brass gear spins endlessly, its backward-facing teeth still trying to tear a hole in time. But that's another story for another time. If you enjoyed this story and would like to hear more like it, please don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing and clicking the notification bell to join our storytelling community. Your support means the world to me. Until next time, sweet dreams, or perhaps pleasant nightmares.